This is a very basic overview of the Bible. It will be in two parts, the Old Testament and then the New Testament. In the Old Testament, we see God revealing himself to people as a specific entity. It is apparent from the stories in the Old Testament that some people knew God before he introduced himself to the world at large. So we can look at the Old Testament as a book where God introduces himself, he reveals his power, he shows his love and his harshness, his rules, and the consequences for obedience and disobedience by mankind. In the Old Testament, God gives his rules, his laws. God uses small numbers of people to give lessons to mankind throughout history. They are universal lessons of how man is supposed to interact with God. The first 5 books of the Bible were written by Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Genesis is a Greek word which means beginning or origin. The first words of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, say, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." There is plenty of dispute between religious and scientific people about the age of the earth, about creation, and when man was created. But remember that this was written to pre-scientific people. Back then, people were basically just herders and farmers. It had to be written in a form that they could understand and accept. If God came and told us right now how he created the earth, we could still not understand it. We could accept it, but we don't have the intelligence or knowledge to actually understand it. And that's what you have here, the simple fact that God created the heavens and the earth. It is a mistake to assume that we are more intellectually sophisticated than the Bible. There are mysteries, in other words, things that are left unexplained in the Bible, that we are not supposed to have an easy understanding of. You are supposed to seek them out and ask God about them. Those are the very types of things that non-believers will seize on and claim that they are contradictions in the Bible. They have no basis to understand what the Bible is talking about because they don't have any faith and they don't really believe in God to start with. Before there was a scientific understanding of geology, people looked at the genealogy written by Moses for the family of the Jews going back to Adam and assumed that the world was created in 4000 BC. The book of Genesis actually does not say this. It gives an allegorical time period in which God created the earth, calling them days. We don't really know what amount of time these days represent. But counting back through the generations using the ages of the people, it seems that Adam and Eve were created about 4000 BC. Instead of worrying about the science, we need to look at what the story of Adam and Eve is actually teaching us. In this story, Satan makes his first appearance in the Bible. Adam and Eve had free will in the garden, but they chose to believe what Satan said instead of what God had already told them. And that is the basis of our test on earth. Will we believe God or will we believe Satan? Through Adam and Eve's interaction with Satan, mankind is polluted. And the next big thing that happens is that God destroys the world, but he saves mankind through Noah and the ark. That was about 2300 BC. Around 2166 BC, God called Abram, a guy from Syria, who eventually became the father of the family of people known as the Jews. Abraham's people eventually moved to Egypt, where they started out as free people, but soon became oppressed and were used as slaves. Moses was born about 1500 BC, and God used him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt into their own land. I will discuss the whole concept of the Israelites taking land away from people who already lived there because it was promised to them by God in a different episode. Of course, people have used this as a justification in modern times to take land that did not belong to them. And I'm not only talking about the Jews in Israel. After the Jews took over the land of Canaan, they had their first king, In about 1000 BC, King Saul, David followed him, and Solomon, who built the first temple, followed him. After only 3 generations of kings, Israel went from a very powerful nation to a local also ran because they rebelled from God. Between 900 BC and when Jesus was born, Israel's history was one of rebelling against God, being conquered, being taken into exile, repenting, and coming back to Israel. For 400 years before Jesus, God was basically silent to the Jews. They received no revelation and had no new prophets up until John the Baptist came forth and told the people in Israel that Jesus was coming.